Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Joe Heschmeyer, our guest for both hours today. So it's going to be a fun one. The very popular Joe Heschmeyer is what I should say. The internet personality Joe Heschmeyer from Shameless Popery, which we just hear so many people say how important Shameless Popery is to them. So you should check it out. And but you know what? Another option for you is just hang on for 2 hours because we've got Joe right here for the next 2 hours. Joe Heschmeyer, author, apologist, and proprietor of Shameless Popery. Welcome.
It's good to be here. I think
Yes.
people are going to worry that you've gone like fever delusional because you were so kind to me, but we'll see.
I know it does seem it can't last. Like there's no way it can last. Like we're going to be together 2 hours. I cannot.
Exactly.
I don't think I've ever been nice to you for 2 straight hours in all the time that I've known you.
Yeah.
So yeah, it can't last. So maybe I am a little fever delusional. All right, tell them what you do at Shameless Popery. People should know what's going on at Shameless Popery because Joe, really, I'm not trying to be nice to you. I'm really not. But it's extraordinary to me how many people this has become their go-to thing. And it's not like you've been doing it for 1,000 years, but it's become their go-to place.
Yeah, I'm really honored by it. So the goal of Shameless Popery, in many ways just the goal of Catholic Answers, is to answer objections people might have to Catholicism and to try to show the truth, the goodness, and the beauty of Catholicism to people who are curious. And that leaves a lot of ground. That means there's a lot of topics that we can cover, and it's a lot of fun to get to do it.
You can check it out on Joe's on the YouTube channel. You can check it out wherever you get your podcasts, or just type in Shameless Popery to your machine, and you will come to it. The number's 888. No, I can't give out the number. Look at that. Look at I already messed up, Joe. We haven't even gotten to the first question. All the questions are in.
Exhibit B, that you might be suffering from some kind of feverish delusions.
I sound like a person with a feverish delusion too, although
that really should have been exhibit A, right?
I don't feel ill. I apologize for my Brenda Vaccaro voice. You have to be my generation to know who Brenda Vaccaro is. But in any case, let me give you a question, and then I can stop talking and you can start talking, which is what people want anyways. Ansley, our good friend, we got to meet Ansley. She came out to one of our conferences, and I think we've known Ansley. She's been calling the show maybe since she was 11 or 12, and just a lovely person. And so she lives in South Carolina, and she had a pretty direct question, Joe. What is ecumenism?
Yes. So ecumenism, we want to make a twofold distinction. When we talk with people who aren't Catholic, there's two kinds. There's what's called interreligious dialogue, where we talk with people who aren't Christian. And then there's ecumenism, where we talk with people who are part of the broad Christian family, but aren't fully Catholic. And the term ecumenism comes from the Greek oikos, which means house. So it's other members of the household, as it were, but they're partially separated. We call them separated brethren. So some people wonder, why do we do this? Like, why don't we just tell everybody that they're wrong? And there's plenty of room to do that. And it's not actually wrong to tell people that they're wrong when they're wrong, as long as you do it in a charitable way, as long as you're motivated by the truth and by the good of the other person. We're called to speak the truth in love. But one thing that sometimes gets overlooked, even by people who want to proclaim the truth boldly, is that there's a time and place to just learn what the other person already believes. And I think we can see this pretty clearly in Scripture. So, for instance, St. Paul, in Acts 17, when he's on Mars Hill and he's preaching to the Athenians, he quotes pagan poets. So we know that Paul took the trouble to learn what did these pagans believe. And we know from St. Irenaeus's Against Heresies in 180, this was our best resource on what it was that Gnostics believed prior to the discovery of the Nag Hammadi library in the 20th century. We didn't have many Gnostic texts, but Irenaeus did such a good job of just tracing what they believed before showing why it was wrong, that it's a good reminder that there is an important time and place to just listen. Hopefully, if you're listening to this show, you can relate to that experience of somebody attacking what they think you believe religiously, politically, whatever it is. And it's just clear they don't understand it at all. Like they just don't know what it is they're talking about. So one of the reasons we have ecumenism, one of the reasons we have interreligious dialogue is so that when we're going to make critiques, they're coming from a place of mutual respect and deep understanding. So if you have a deep understanding and appreciation of what the other person believes, if you can recognize what they're getting right, it puts you in such a better position to address what it is that they're wrong on, where their view of reality is incomplete or where their Christian theology may be going astray. So that's why we do both interreligious dialogue and ecumenism. Ansley, I hope that helps. Happy to hear from you if you want to call in and let us know what you think.
I'm not going to give out the phone number. I have the habit of doing
Good
it, but
on you.
I'm not going to give out the phone number. Ansley, thanks for the call. Joe Heschmeyer is our guest, and it's a weird show today because Joe and I are getting along right from the beginning. So just hang around, see what happens. I'm fascinated by this. It's never happened before. Let's get a question in from Joseph in Texas. Joseph was on the line, asked this question but didn't stay. So why did Mary have to be immaculately conceived?
So she didn't strictly have to be immaculately conceived. When we're talking about this, there's what's called necessity and what's called fittingness. That there are things where God does it because it's the best way, but he didn't have to do it that way. So Mary could have been a sinner. There's no logical reason it would have been impossible, but it is more fitting for her to have not been a sinner for several reasons. And if you want a much longer explanation on this, Trent Horn has covered this. I also did an episode on this because I thought Trent's arguments were wrong at first. And then the more I looked into them, the more I realized he was absolutely right. So I have an episode that's just called I Was Wrong, Worse, Trent Horn Was Right. And I mean, hopefully people get that it's a playful kind of title. But it's true that there is a good reason for Mary to be immaculately conceived. And we can actually talk about several good reasons. One is there's a fittingness that God himself is coming into the world. In the Old Covenant, when the Ark of the Covenant, the Shekinah, the overshadowing glory of God, was made present, the Ark was so holy that people couldn't even touch it. And this was not about the Ark for its own sake. This was about the Ark as, if you want to say, the bearer of the presence of God. Well, Mary is the bearer of God. That is what Theotokos means, God bearer. We usually say mother of God, but it literally is bearer of God. She is bearing God in her womb. And so we expect her to be very holy. But we can say even more than that, a few different places. In paragraph 490 of the Catechism, it says, in order for Mary to be able to give the free assent of her faith to the announcement of her vocation, it was necessary that she be wholly born by God's grace. Now, that doesn't require automatically that she had to be immaculately conceived, but it shows why it's so fitting that she should be immaculately conceived, that she is being carried along by the grace of God to be able to give her free consent to the plan of God. And the important thing there is that grace makes you freer. It's not like she becomes a robot or an automaton or something. But rather, she has been preserved supernaturally from sin by being strengthened in the battle against sin. And Dr. Jack Mulder has done some really interesting work on this, where he suggests that this is fitting in terms of consent. So imagine if you've done something at work and it's a fireable offense, and then your boss approaches you and you know you could be fired in a minute, and then they make like an untoward proposition. In those contexts, there have been plenty of, I mean, this is a lot of the Harvey Weinstein scandals or any of these things where somebody's in a vulnerable or compromising position because of things like power imbalance. They are then propositioned in a way where they say yes, but they say yes under a certain amount of duress. And so the idea is basically Mary, it's obviously different. It's a virginal conception and birth, but she's being asked to give of her own body to bear Jesus Christ. And if she's in a situation where, because of her sin, she could be struck dead at any moment and go to hell for all eternity, how free is she to say yes? And yet we see that she does. And I've actually heard Protestants claim Mary doesn't have to say yes. She's just told what's going to happen. But Mary does say yes. She says, "Let it be done to me according to thy word." It's very clear that Mary consents and that this consent is important. But her consent is less free if she's a sinner who doesn't have space to say no to this plan of God without risk of damnation. A good example of this is in Isaiah chapter 6. In Isaiah 6, the prophet Isaiah sees God in heaven. And rather than rejoicing, as he hears the angels cry out, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory," Isaiah's response is one of terror because he knows he's a sinner. He says, "Woe is me, for I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts." And God doesn't disagree with that. Instead, one of the seraphim goes to the altar and brings a burning coal, and he undergoes a little earthly purgatory. He purifies him by putting the burning coal to his lips. And he says, "Behold, this has touched your lips, your guilt is taken away, and your sin forgiven." And it's only at that point that he hears, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" And he says, "Here I am, send me." And he's sent by God. He is purified so that he can give his free consent to God. Now, Mary could have been purified in the same way. But the point there is whether she was purified through this kind of purgation or whether she was, better yet, preserved from having sinned in the first place. There was this sense where it seems fitting or even necessary that she be freed from sin to be able to give her free yes to God. So I would suggest that there's something both logical and intuitive about that. So was it strictly necessary? No. Was it appropriate? Was it fitting? Is it more glorifying to God? I would say certainly yes.
Joseph, thank you for that question. Lots more drop calls coming up. Joe Heschmeyer, our guest, right back with more on Catholic Answers Live.
Catch Catholic Answers live anytime at Catholic.com.
Homeschool Connections, an online provider of courses for your Catholic homeschool, is a sponsor of Catholic Answers Live. Homeschool Connections website is homeschoolconnections.com.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
Check out EWTN's official YouTube channel.
Just follow the link on our homepage at EWTN.com or go to YouTube.com/EWTN.
Watch EWTN's live shows or today's homily from the daily Mass.
Click the upload button to see our most recent clips.
You can also find all of EWTN YouTube content by clicking the playlist button.
It's all on the official EWTN YouTube channel at YouTube.com/EWTN.
Visit today.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Joe Heschmeyer, our guest. Drop calls today. And we got one of the nice things about the drop calls is we can kind of curate them a little bit. So we ask the calls that we find interesting, or we take the calls that we find interesting. And this one comes from Prentice, who at the time of the call was watching on YouTube from Gonzales, Louisiana. Prentice, I'm sorry we didn't get to talk, but this was the question that Prentice had to ask, or was about to ask. Galatians chapter 1, verse 8, Joe. It points to the apostles potentially failing to pass on the gospel in the early church. Is that correct? Is that a correct reading of Galatians chapter 1, verse 8?
No, it is clear from St. Paul's letter to the Galatians that two things have happened. First, Paul has accurately given them the gospel. And second, people have come along after this and led them astray. And he is very clear about this. He says, for instance, in Galatians 3, "O foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you, before whose eyes Jesus Christ was publicly portrayed as crucified?" And then he asks them in verse 3, are you so foolish? Having begun with the Spirit, are you now ending with the flesh? So it's clear that they had the right gospel, but were turning from the gospel for a false gospel. And contextually, it seems that this was what was called the Judaizer heresy, this idea that you had to follow the law of Moses in order to be saved. And Paul condemns it in very strong words. And he says, going back to Galatians 1, start with verse 6, I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting him who called you in the gospel of Christ and turning to a different gospel. Not that there is another gospel, but there are some who trouble you and want to pervert the gospel of Christ. But even if we or an angel from heaven should preach to you a gospel contrary to that which we preach to you, let him be accursed, or let him be anathema. Nothing in there suggests that the apostles actually were preaching this false gospel. We know that there were some people coming down from Jerusalem, some Jewish converts to Christianity, who believed in this heretical form of Christianity, and they were regularly rebuked. But none of the apostles are implicated in that. They're sometimes said to be of the party of James, including by Paul. He uses that kind of language. But James himself doesn't appear to have ever taught that. It's just people who liked James, or people who were in this kind of Jerusalem church who had taken over too much of their earlier understanding of the Mosaic law and treated it as if it was itself salvific and it was meant to be ongoing in the new covenant. So the point Paul is making in saying, even if we or an angel should preach that, is just to say, literally, no one can contradict this because this is the gospel of Jesus Christ. He's not suggesting either angels or apostles are literally doing that. They wouldn't. But his point is that he's not just declaring this on his own. This is not just his own personal interpretation of Scripture. He is giving what he's been given by Christ, which is why he refers to it as the gospel of Christ in verse 7.
Prentice, thank you very much for the question. This came from Al in Washington. He was listening on 88.1 FM. Al wanted to know, this is such a good question. So rarely is it asked, and I actually think Joe Heschmeyer is the guy to ask it. Former seminarian, former lawyer. I ask you in your capacity as all these former things, Joe, why is there a separation of church and state?
It's a great question. And it's a question that needs a little bit of unpacking because we might put it in two ways. One is, why is there a distinction between church and state? And then we can think about the so-called wall of separation. Because what there shouldn't be is a separation of faith and morality from the public sphere. That in public and in legislation, morality should inform our vision of the law. And of course it should. Every law is an expression of morality. If you say the speed limit on this road is 35 because of the school zone, you're saying something about the relative importance of, the health and safety of children compared to the relative importance of getting to work on time or speeding commerce along or something like that. You're making value judgments in every law you make, no matter how seemingly banal the law is. So I mentioned that at the outset to say a radical separation where I'll give you a great example. With abortion, Planned Parenthood sued the Catholic Church, attacking the tax exempt status of the Catholic Church for the church speaking out in pro-life messages because they accused the church of being partisan and political. So allegedly, being pro-life is too political for the church. But if a politician tries to pass a pro-life law, they're accused of trying to create a theocracy. So it's allegedly too religious for politics, allegedly too political for religion. So you can be pro-choice, but if you're pro-life, you're not allowed to do that because something separation of church and state. That's an idiotic and manipulative misuse of the legitimate distinction between church and state. And so a lot of people say, well, let's just get rid of the whole thing. But there is a legitimate distinction between church and state, and we see it in Scripture itself. Now, you can see this in a clear way when Jesus is presented with the question about paying taxes, and he asks whose image is on the coin. It's Caesar's, and he says, render unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and render unto God what belongs to God. The mistake would be imagining that this means that the secular realm, the realm of Caesar, is entirely distinct from the realm of God, and that would be a mistake. In fact, that would be a very grave mistake, because Jesus also tells us that we can't serve two masters. So you can't just imagine we've got these two masters. We've got God over here, and we serve him on Sunday, and we've got Caesar over here, and we serve him, on the weekdays. That would be gravely wrong. And unfortunately, many Christians, that's how they live their life. These are my private morals, but I'm not allowed to bring them into the workplace. I'm not allowed to bring them into politics. That's wrong, wrong, wrong. You're supposed to give all of yourself to God because you are made in his image. Just like the coin has Caesar's image on it, you have God's image. And so all of you belongs to God, including your financial transactions, including how you spend your free time, including how you are at work. All of that belongs to God. So then, how does this shake out in terms of the role of secular authority? There's 3 verses you should know about. The first is when Jesus is before Pontius Pilate, and Pilate says to him, this is John 19, verse 10. He says, "You will not speak to me? Do you not know that I have the power to release you and the power to crucify you?" And what does Jesus say in response? "You would have no power over me unless it had been given you from above. Therefore, he who delivered me to you has the greater sin." That's the first thing you should know. All power, according to Jesus, or Pilate's power at least, is coming from God. And I think you can draw legitimately that this is true of all secular authority. That's true not just of Pilate, but of Caesar and of everyone else. That their authority, whether they realize it or not, comes from God, to the extent they have legitimate authority. This point is made more explicit in Romans chapter 13. St. Paul says, "Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, he who resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment." So we are called to obey legitimate secular authority. And then St. Peter in 1 Peter 2, verse 17 says, "Live as free men, yet without using your freedom as a pretext for evil, but live as servants for God. Honor all men, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the emperor." And yet, this same Peter and Paul, make no mistake, are executed for refusing to obey unlawful orders from the emperor. That even though they talk about the need to serve the governing authorities, when the governing authorities violate the law of God, Peter famously says we must serve God rather than men. That there is a higher law. Think about it this way. If you're a child and your parents leave and they leave the babysitter in charge, you obey the babysitter because the babysitter acts with the authority of your parents. But if your babysitter tries to get you to do something immoral and unlawful, you know your parents wouldn't want you to do that, so you don't do it. You obey in as far as they're using their legitimate authority, but you disobey if they violate this broader authority. So even though there's this distinct authority that the emperor has distinct from Peter, Peter acknowledges it, nevertheless, the authority of the emperor, like the authority of Peter, is subject to this higher authority, the law of God. And so if the civil authority acts in a way that contradicts the law of God, then we're not just free to disobey, we're even commanded to disobey if obedience would be sinful.
Wait, which one? Who was that?
That was Al in Washington.
Al in Washington. Yes, Al. Thank you very much for that question. The number here, I'm not going to give out because it's all. What? I'm sorry. That was like a tease. Like, oh, he's going to give out the number. I'm going to call and ask my question. No, we're not taking questions today because we already got all the questions in. It's drop calls this hour. Joe Heschmeyer is our guest, and we've got about 1 million drop calls to get through. So yours are welcome. This one, well, I shouldn't say yours are welcome. They're either already in. Do we have
time now, or are we about to cut to the break?
I was going to try Frank's question, but do you think I should? Frank was listening to Sirius, to EWTN on channel 130, Sirius XM satellite radio from Michigan. Is sacramental marriage possible without a civil marriage?
Yes. So the state should recognize legitimate marriage, but there's no, if you had a country that, for instance, didn't recognize a marriage, that would be fine in terms of you could still have the sacrament. There are cases, for instance, in the 19th century, when slaves would get married, they could still have legitimate sacramental marriages, even though Jim Crow South didn't recognize slave marriages as legitimate, or I guess pre-Jim Crow. So you can have civil marriage. It's great if you do, but you can have a sacramental marriage whether you have the civil marriage or not.
Wow, well timed, Joe. All right, we'll take a quick break, and then we'll be back with more Joe Heschmeyer from Shameless Popery on Catholic Answers Live. All the calls are in. It's drop calls, so you know they're good. Coming right back with that after this on Catholic Answers Live.
We hope that one of the things that we communicate here at Catholic Answers Live is that our Catholic faith allows us to be fully serious about all the problems we encounter in the church and in the world, but it also lets us have light hearts and maybe even mix in a bit of fun, and that is exactly what our good friend Joe Heschmeyer does in his popular podcast, Shameless Popery. You should check it out at shamelessjoe.com. Joe's got a deep grasp of the faith, morals, the teachings of the church, all that, but he's also got a witty conversational style. He entertains and he informs, but you will leave equipped to better answer the most common challenges, misconceptions, and questions about the Catholic faith. He's got insightful guests, he does on-air debates, and he takes a close look into all the things that you want to know about as a Catholic living today. You'll walk away knowledgeable and filled with joy. Look for Joe on his YouTube channel. Check him out at shamelessjoe.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, become a patron.
Throughout history, some Catholics have been among the worst kind of villains, right? Or were they? In Cancelled, historian Steve Weidenkopf digs into the lives and controversies of some of these Catholics whose reputations have been blackened, often unfairly. He takes on the anti-Catholic versions of history and defends not only these figures, but the faith they represent. Order your copy of Cancelled today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
When the resurrected Jesus appeared to disciples on the road to Emmaus, they didn't recognize him until the breaking of the bread. The same is true today. In the Holy Eucharist, we really meet Jesus. In The Eucharist is Really Jesus, author Joe Heschmeyer explains how knowing Jesus in the Eucharist is the key to understanding all of Christian faith. Order your copy of The Eucharist is Really Jesus today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore.
A little bit of groovy music for Joe Heschmeyer. Drop calls today. Hannah was in Washington when she called. She was listening on the Catholic Answers app. And I never mentioned this, but it's a cool feature of the app. You can get the Catholic Answers app, and then you're listening to the show, and a question comes up to you. You can just push a button, and it takes you right into the studio. So it'll dial direct into here. And I don't know. In a lot of places around the world, it'll work, but here in the U.S., it'll definitely work. So get the app, and then when you have a question, all you push the button, and you're on with us. Well, almost. There's an intermediate step where Edgar sees if the question is appropriate for the air, but I'm sure it will be if you've got the app. Hannah was in Washington, as I said, listening on the app, and asked this: how do I discern the papacy claims on both the Catholic and Orthodox side, and which way to go? How do I decide? How will I know? She's asking the Whitney Houston question. How will I know?
I like that reference. Well, Houston, we have a problem.
Uh-oh.
No.
Why? You go. I'm gonna act like that didn't happen. Okay, Joe. So, how will she know?
It's a great question. So, I actually address some of this in my book, Pope Peter, because the core answer I would give is that both Orthodox and Catholics want to be part of the church established by Christ, and both Orthodox and Catholics believe that church is a visible church 2,000 years old, and that we can find that church on the pages of Scripture. And then the question I think that remains is, within that visible church, did Jesus entrust one man to have a kind of final authority? Now, we don't need to know all of the contours of how that should shake out. Sometimes these Catholic Orthodox discussions get super in the weeds, and I don't think that's actually necessary or helpful. I would say, does Jesus leave Peter with a kind of unique authority, and does he intend for that unique Petrine authority to last in perpetuity? And I think we can say yes to that in several ways. Now, again, I cover this a lot more in the book Pope Peter. If you want to check out that book, Hannah, I would tell you to stay on the line, but you're not on the line right now. So call back and
we'll give you a copy.
Question. We'll give you a copy. We're happy to do it. Let me just give you a couple places. So Luke 22, the disciples are arguing about which of them is the greatest. And Jesus doesn't tell them that it's wrong to want to be great or anything like this. He tells them how to be great. And he tells them that it's not like the way the Gentiles do it. They exercise lordship over others, and they want all this authority just for themselves. But not so with you. Rather, let the greatest among you become as the youngest, and the leader as one who serves. So he's just given us the thing to look for. The leader is going to be one who serves, and he is himself the model. He says, I'm among you as one who serves. Now, in a sense, that applies to all of the 12. So what we just heard from, this begins in Luke 22:24, and we're now down at 27. Then in verse 28, he says to the 12, you are those who have continued with me in my trials. As my Father appointed a kingdom for me, so do I appoint for you, that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, and sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. So, okay, all of them are called to be servant leaders for the entire church. They're to be the servants of God. But then in the very next verse, he singles out one of them. And he says, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan demanded to have you. Now, this is you plural. This is you all. That he might sift you all like wheat. But I have prayed for you. Now, he switches from the plural to the singular. So all 12 are under demonic assault. And the response of Jesus is to pray for one of them, Simon Peter. But I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned again, because he knows it will fail, when you have turned again, strengthen your brethren. So that's a papal model right there. That the Pope is to be the servant of the servants of God. Peter is to serve those who are called to lead by serving. He is to be the servant leader of the servant leaders. That's very plainly biblical. Pair that with things like Matthew 16, where Peter is uniquely given the keys of the kingdom of heaven and told individually, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. No other individual is told anything like this. And you see this all throughout the Bible, all throughout the New Testament, I should say. Every time the apostles are listed, Judas, if he appears, he's listed last. Peter is always listed first. And Acts, Peter in the 11 is how Luke refers to the 12 disciples. I mean, very clearly singling Peter out for this special place of primacy, special authority. Go tell his apostles and Peter that Jesus has risen. I mean, all of this kind of language over and over and over and over again. Peter is singled out, not just because he's like a natural born leader or something. No, because Jesus is putting him in these positions and giving him special instructions that he's to take care of the others. That's the model. And so then the question becomes whether this model was just meant for one generation or whether it's meant to last forever. Now, the first thing I'd say is certainly the burden of proof would be with the person who says, yeah, sure, Jesus set up a papacy, but he didn't mean for that papacy to last beyond a generation. Well, show me some evidence of that, because normally when Jesus gives some teaching, we assume that that teaching remains valid. But you can also make the positive case. Now, this probably takes more time than I should reasonably take to get in the weeds on this. But in John 21, there is, it's kind of the epilogue to the Gospel of John. And Peter goes out fishing with 6 others. And he says, I'm going fishing. They say, we will go with you. And what you should know for this is that fishing and nets and boats, all of this represents the church and evangelization over and over and over again. In Luke chapter 5, with the first miraculous catch of fish, Jesus says to Peter, you'll be a fisher of men, very clearly connecting the fishing miracle with evangelization. In Matthew 13, he compares the church to a net containing good and bad fish. In Matthew 17, there is a second miraculous catch of fish where Peter catches a fish with a coin to pay for just him and Jesus, their temple tax. And so there is this special connection with Peter, with the church, with evangelization, whenever we see these miraculous parable references to fishing, net, the catching of fish, all this. So we see the third miraculous catch of fish in John 21. Peter and the others are not able to catch any fish on their own, but at Jesus' command, they catch so many fish that they cannot bring in the nets. Peter then realizes that it's Jesus who had appeared on the shore, so he swims to Jesus. The others drag the net behind, but they still can't bring it in. In John 21, verse 10, Jesus says, "Bring some of the fish you have just caught." So Peter then goes aboard and hauls the net ashore, full of large fish, 153 of them. And we're told, although there were so many, the net was not torn. Now, there's two things you should know. First, in early Christian reading of this, people like St. Augustine talk about this, says that what's going on here is not, like the point of John 21 is not to show that Jesus has risen from the dead. That has already been established in John 20. And in fact, John is very clear that he feels like that mission has been accomplished. In the end of John 20, he says, "Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name." And he says this right after Jesus appears to Thomas. He says, "My Lord and my God." Meaning, the point of John 1 through 20 is that Jesus is who he says he is. He really is from God. He is with God. He is God. He lived, died, rose from the dead. John 21, this epilogue, is the story of the church. But as so often happens with John, it's the story of the church told almost like a parable, where he takes this event and wants us to think about what this means for the church. So here's the church on its journey to the eternal shores with Christ, which is why the number of apostles is 7, the number of perfection, the seventh day is the day of rest. As Hebrews says, when we go to heaven, we enter the Sabbath rest of God. 7 is the number of completion. So as we journey towards that, as we go from toiling with the nets and evangelization and the church, we're heading towards the eternal shores with Christ, where we're going to eat with him, the wedding feast of the Lamb, the breakfast in John 21. Peter has a special role. And what is that role? The apostles are not able to bring the church to Christ on their own. But at the word of God, at the command of Christ, Peter can bring those nets to Christ without the nets tearing. Here's the second detail to know. That the term there is schismo, which is where both schizophrenia and schism come from. And so he can bring the net to Christ without it tearing if Peter is the one bringing it to Christ. And this is something that was not lost on the early Christians. St. Optatus of Miletus, writing in the early 300s, talks about the fact that there's only one apostolic see, Rome, because Peter has this special role. Because otherwise, if all the apostles could set up their own unique cathedras, you would have a bunch of schisms right away. You'd have people say, well, I follow Andrew or I follow Paul. And this is exactly what Christians are told not to do in places like 1 Corinthians 1. And so only one apostle, Peter, is viewed as having the church that has this ultimate authority, the way Peter had an ultimate authority. All the apostles are leaders. All the apostles have authority. And yet one of them is entrusted with a kind of final authority. And we see this as well in the writings of the earliest Christians. St. Irenaeus in 180 talks about the fact that it's a matter of necessity that every church should agree with this church. He's talking about the Church of Rome on account of its preeminent authority. He's quite clear. This is not some new invention in the 11th century, as you'll sometimes hear from Orthodox apologists. Like, no, we find this in the 2nd century. And I think you can even argue that we find it in the 1st century in things like the first letter of Clement. Then you look at things like, this will be the last point I make. I know I've spent a long time answering this. In 519, the formula of Pope St. Hormisdas settles an internal schism that was going on between the East and West. And if you read the text, it talks about the necessity of being in union with Rome, with the Apostolic See. And so what usually you'll hear in response to this from Orthodox, you can't deny this overwhelming weight of historical evidence, you'll often hear one of two things. One, oh, this is just honorific kind of language. And I don't think we see equivalent levels of honorific language. You can find inflated language used for other people, sure. But Rome is always treated in this singular kind of way. And two, they'll say, oh, well, Rome was orthodox in its faith then, so then you did have to believe. But I think there's a certain naivety there, because obviously every heretic in history would say, oh, sure, we would have been in union with the Pope back when the Pope was right. But now that we disagree, we can no longer be in union with the Pope.
Yeah.
And so if the standard is just agree with the Pope unless you disagree with the Pope, that is a truism. That's a meaningless standard that doesn't do anything to promote church unity, because it would only work until we're disunified. And the whole point is that we're given a standard for unity when we would be tempted to go in a different direction. In the same way that your wedding vows are not for when everything is going great in your marriage, it's for when things are hard and when you might be tempted to run. Well, so too, we're told to agree with Rome. We're told about the Apostolic See. We're told about the role of Peter, because sometimes we're tempted to run. Sometimes we're tempted to break away. Sometimes we're tempted to do our own thing. And it's precisely in those moments when our own private judgment would be, oh, well, I think Rome is wrong. That's when we're told to hold fast and to be part of this union. So I think the evidence is actually quite overwhelming. The very last point I'd make, Matthew 13, Jesus compares the church to a mustard seed that grows into a mustard tree, which is the largest of the plants of the garden. One of the points Jesus is very clear about is that it's going to be very easy to find the church because the church is going to be the biggest guy around. The Catholic Church is like 4 times larger than all the Eastern Orthodox churches put together. And the Eastern Orthodox churches aren't even really in full union with one another. So it's not hard, using the test Jesus gave, whether you look at Peter or whether you look at the mustard tree, to figure out where the true church is.
Anna, you asked a question of a guy who wrote a book about the papacy. You asked a papacy question. You got yourself an answer there, Hannah. I hope that was helpful to you. I heard some music, so I think Darren wants us to go to a break. Let's take a quick break. Right back with more Joe Heschmeyer on Catholic Answers Live.
You could be that person that God uses to save a soul, and that soul could save their family, their grandchildren, and generations to come. At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we train, equip, and mobilize Catholic disciples to do the urgent work of evangelization. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
He was a Jesuit, a cardinal, and a doctor of the Church.
Matthew Bunsen and the Doctors of the Church.
St. Robert Bellarmine is honored for his immense contributions to theology, including helping to draft 2 important catechisms that defended church teachings during the Protestant Revolt. Pope Clement VIII named Bellarmine a cardinal because, as the Pope put it, Bellarmine had not his equal for learning.
For more about the Doctors of the Church, visit doctorsofthechurch.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Joe Heschmeyer is our guest. I mentioned Joe's got a book about the Pope, Pope Peter. He's got The Early Church Was the Catholic Church. He's got The Eucharist is Really Jesus, which that title is so clear. And then Joe pays it off in the book that there's so many people who have been like, oh, the Eucharist is really Jesus. That's the one that got me. That convinced me. Oh, I get it now. It's like the light went on for a lot of people with that book. So you can get all of Joe's books over at shop.catholic.com. They're not all as good as Eucharist is Really Jesus. I'm not saying that, but you can get them all there. I just can't do it, Joe. I can't just praise you.
You lasted
I was so close, huh?
44 minutes. That was, I think, a new PR.
Yeah. All right, on we go. Let's see. Well, Chris in North Carolina, he asked this. Chris wanted to know, what are the last 2 declared infallible doctrines of the Catholic Church?
Yeah, that'd be the Assumption of Mary in 1950 and the infallibility of the Pope in 1870. The Immaculate Conception is 1854, if you want the third one. There are other things that the Church has arguably declared infallibly, but they're not doctrines. So the general view of theologians is that when the Pope canonizes a saint, that is an infallible act. You will find some people who say that it's not. but the language sounds like the language of an infallible declaration. You'll also find things where we reiterate existing infallible teaching. The clearest example of that, I mean, in one sense, anytime you proclaim the gospel, you're reiterating infallible teaching. You know, when you quote the words of Jesus, that you're doing that in a way. But John Paul II used his authority as Pope to affirm that the question of women's ordination to the priesthood had already been settled definitively and infallibly in the negative, that women could not be ordained to the priesthood. So he made it very clear, using his authority as Pope, that this was the infallible teaching of the Church. But he also was clear that he wasn't declaring some new doctrine, that this was already the infallible teaching of the Church. And he was just using papal authority to clarify any confusion on that point.
Okay. Thanks, Chris, for the question. Let's see. John in Colorado was watching on Twitch. Would Theotokos be more correct than Theotokos?
Not more correct. It would also be correct. So
okay, you got to explain some Greek here.
Okay, so the controversy when the whole Theotokos thing, I actually mentioned Theotokos earlier in this hour, but Christotokos was a proposed term for Mary, which means Christ bearer or mother of God. And this comes up in the Nestorian controversy. The response, so Nestorius and those who are in kind of the Nestorian camp said we shouldn't call Mary the mother of God. We should call Mary the mother of Christ. Or we shouldn't call Mary the God bearer. We should call her the Christ bearer. And you'll sometimes hear Protestants who make this same argument. And this argument is wrong. The argument's wrong for basic Christological reasons. That Jesus is God. And that when you bear a child, that does not mean you originate all of their properties. This is, I mean, the usual argument goes, well, Mary didn't give Jesus his divinity. That's okay. So what? When a woman gives birth to a baby boy, she didn't originate his masculinity. That's not what we mean. Like mother doesn't mean a sole originator of or anything like that. That's just not what the term means. Well, so it's an incoherent biological objection. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I got excited and I wanted to ask you a question. Like,
please.
Like my mother didn't give me my soul.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
So this objection just doesn't make any sense. Your mom is your mom, and significantly, your mom is the mother of you. She's not just the mother of your, body or something like that. She's not just the mother of your humanity. She's not the mother of a nature or a property. She's the mother of a person. Jesus is a divine person. He's not a human person. He's a divine person with a human nature. He is God. He's the second person of the Trinity. And if you understand that, and then understand that this person has a human mother because of the incarnation, because he chose to have a human mother, then you realize that if you're going to say Mary's the mother of Jesus, then you have to be willing to say that she's the mother of the Lord, meaning that she's the mother of God. In Luke chapter 1, when Elizabeth greets Mary and the visitation, she refers to her as the mother of my Lord. This means the same thing as when Thomas says, my Lord and my God. So that Luke 1:43. She says, why is this granted me that the mother of my Lord should come to me? Now, Lord, Kyrios, is the term that the Jews would use to refer using the unspeakable name of God that God revealed to Moses. And so as a way of speaking in a kind of deferential way, anytime that gets translated into Greek, we'll find that translated as Kyrios, which means Lord. And so when she says mother of my Lord, that this means mother of God. That's what it means in context. And so to say that Mary is not the mother of God, you'd have to say either that she's not really the mother of Jesus or that Jesus isn't really God. And both of those are obviously false, obviously heretical. So is Mary the mother of Christ? She is. That's actually not in dispute. But we refuse to be limited to calling her the mother of Christ instead of the mother of God, because we want to stress that she's not just the mother of a nature, she's the mother of a divine person. And that this divine person is, as the term divine person suggests, he is God. And so it's to protect Jesus that we protect these Marian titles, Because if you get this messed up, if you get this confused, and I've seen prominent Protestants get this wrong, then you end up having a very poor Christology.
All right, John, thank you very much for the question. Let me look at the time. Yeah, we got time for another one. Matthew in Texas was listening to EWTN on channel 130 Sirius XM satellite radio. Why do people think the church was started in the 300s?
I mean, one answer would be people don't know church history very well. But
they haven't read a book. There's a certain book that they have not read. That's what the problem is, Matthew. There's one book they have not read.
Yes, I wrote a book called The Early Church Was the Catholic Church that looks at Christianity prior to the year 200. So in the first century and in the second century, what does Christianity look like? When we listen to those Christians in their own words, what do they say? Because you can find a lot of people telling you what those Christians believed. I just responded to a video from a Protestant who's big on TikTok claiming, all of this Catholic stuff was introduced by the Emperor Constantine when Christianity was legalized, and this all comes from paganism. This is a very common, very obviously false story. The true part, Constantine legalizes Christianity in the Roman Empire. It had been illegal prior to that point. The false part is this claim that then all of the Christians just embraced all these pagan practices. It's a very silly story for an obvious reason. These Christians were being killed for refusing to compromise with paganism, and now we're expected to believe that they all were just like, well, I guess if you legalize Christianity, we'll all just compromise with paganism. The whole reason it was illegal is that the Christians refused to do that. So this story, a lot of people are convinced by it, but when you read the actual documents, here's what we find. Number one, we don't find that Constantine introduced any new doctrines. Constantine didn't even get baptized until his deathbed. He legalized Christianity. He wanted Christians to be coherent in what they believed, and so he does arrange for the First Council of Nicaea. The First Council of Nicaea doesn't do half the things you've heard that it did, and you can find this out for yourself by reading the very clear canons of the Council of Nicaea, First Council of Nicaea, which they don't, for instance, take a bunch of Gnostic or other books out of the Bible. That's just not true. They don't decide which books belong in the Bible. That's not a thing that they did. If you've heard those stories, those are just not true. So we don't see any major changes in the 300s to some new doctrines. It didn't happen. We don't see a bunch of, pagan temples in Rome becoming churches overnight. That is a popular story. Doesn't really happen. Some of those pagan temples become churches hundreds of years later. But they actually the early Christians made a point of not just having to go from one week it's a pagan temple and the next week it's a Christian church to avoid any kind of confusion. So a lot of the churches in Rome that had been pagan temples became secular buildings for centuries, and then later were turned into churches when there was no longer any risk of conflation with paganism. So the kind of popular story about this is just wrong. And I would say you can read my book, The Early Church Was the Catholic Church. You can also just read the writings of the early Christians who are very clear what they believe about the Eucharist, about the saints, about the role of the bishop, about all these things that allegedly come from paganism, very clearly don't come from paganism. And so unfortunately, there have been some, I would say honestly, kind of absurd books. Alexander Hislop's book, The Two Babylons, claimed all the distinctive elements of Catholicism were introduced from paganism. And no scholar, secular or religious, takes that seriously. You just cannot trace any of those things. So if you hear somebody claiming this, here's what I would suggest you do. Number one, ask them for evidence, and ask them for evidence from the early sources. And then number two, read the early sources yourself, and you can see that these things aren't true.
Hey, if you call back sometime, Matthew, I'll give you a copy of The Early Church Was the Catholic Church. Never mind the year 300. Joe handles before the year 200. He doesn't even bother. Let's go back before the year 200 and you can recognize the Catholic Church there. So from the very earliest years. Joe, thanks for the hour. Will you do another hour with us?
I'd be happy to.
All right. I promise to be nice for another hour. I feel like I'm really bringing it off. That'll do it for us for this hour, but we got lots more drop calls coming up right after this on Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Joe Heschmeyer, our guest for another hour of drop calls. And boy, you got through a lot that first hour. You did a really good job, Joe. I'm trying to make Joe uncomfortable by being really nice to him today. He does not know what to do with that.
I think he's going to ask me for money over the break.
I probably will. Yeah. Oh, by the way, I'm going to need a loan, Joe. Did it hurt your feelings when I told you that I didn't care if we flew on the same plane back from Europe together? Do you remember when this happened?
I didn't know this happened.
No, because I did tell you about it, but I think you might have forgotten about it. But Jen, who is a lovely person, is like, look, I can arrange it. Like, if you wait 2 hours and Joe waits, an hour and a half, I can get you guys on the same plane back from Europe. And I was like, don't want to be on the same plane with Joe. She's like, no, I can do it. I was like, I don't care. I don't want to be on the same, because we're going to be in Europe together for 2 weeks on this pilgrimage.
Yes.
And then I was like, what are we going to do? You're going to do all this work to get us on the same plane, and then we're going to actively ignore each other for 10 hours while we fly back to the United States.
Did that hurt your feelings? Here? Not at all. Okay. I recently was so my mother-in-law was just in town, and she watched our 3 kids so that my wife and I could go on a trip together that was over Valentine's Day weekend. I was giving a talk at a Chesterton conference gala up in the suburbs of Detroit.
Oh,
no, in Detroit. Oh, okay. And it was a blast. And we got to go to an area like in the Polish area in Hamtramck where John Paul II had been, and we got to go to the shrine of Blessed Salatus Casey. But on the flight back, a lovely weekend with my wife, Valentine's weekend, we're sitting together, and she's like taking the armrest. I'm just like actively, awkwardly avoiding. And I'm like, oh man, I really don't like when people take the armrest. And she's like, I'm your wife. I was like, I know, but as a matter of principle, like,
yeah, right.
You're on a plane. It's already a little bit uncomfortable. Like, it's not a real snuggly flight. So all that's to say, I am extremely unromantic on planes. I'm just like, let's get this flight thing over with.
Well, I'm definitely glad I'm not flying with you then.
Yeah,
I'm definitely glad. That would be very uncomfortable. Well, let me ask you this, and then I'll give you a call. But I travel a lot, and you travel a lot.
Yeah.
And I have realized now that I just shut down when I'm traveling. I just go into like a shell, and I'm just getting through it. And so when I travel with my wife, I'm kind of mean. Like, I realize, dude, you need to be nicer, because she's like, well, should we go this way or that one? I was like, this way. Like, I know where. I know where everything is.
I'm like 100% in the wrong with it. So anyone listening who's like,
that's the way I feel.
It's like, yeah, I know. But like, I'm very used to doing everything in a very regimented, rigid sort of way.
That's how you get through
I'm not organized in any other area of my life. When it comes to flights or checking out of hotel rooms, I've got a system. And having my wife or kids along, they're lovely. I love spending time with them genuinely, and they don't know my system.
Yeah.
And so, like, my wife will like grab my wallet and keys to try to help me, and I'm spending like 5 minutes looking for my wallet and keys, and it's like, oh no. So
yeah,
it was a fun test of our marriage. So,
well,
again, like, I know I'm in the wrong, but I think anyone who's a regular traveler can attest.
Yeah.
Like, when you're with a casual traveler,
you're like, stop it. Stop being casual. There's a way to do this. Stop
It's like being on the freeway and having like the new driver there. You're just like, okay, I appreciate that. It's got to be your first time sometime, but
yeah, we as a society, we have chosen to make airports and airplanes utterly miserable. It's like we made a decision and we're sticking to it. It has to be utterly unpleasant. There's just. And it seems like, we spend billions on all kinds of different things. Throw a few billion at this and everybody could have a good trip. No, we're not. No way. It has to be maximum miserable.
Yeah. Like, what is the fewest inches of legroom we can get away with? What's the thinnest we can make the seats?
Also this, like, what's the most we can charge for a turkey sandwich? in a plastic box. You know, like, oh, thank you for that turkey sandwich that's $37 that's going to get me through my flight. Thank you so much for that. All right, enough of that. Ed in Kansas City, Missouri. You're familiar with Kansas City, Missouri, Joe?
I am here right now.
He was listening on 1090 AM and wanted to know this. Why are the 10 commandments? Oh, this is good. I like this. Why are the 10 commandments different for Catholics and Protestants?
The answer is that they're not, but they are numbered differently. And the reason they're numbered differently is somewhat complicated. Namely, we find the 10 commandments twice in the Old Testament. They're in Exodus 20 and then in Deuteronomy 5. That's the first thing you should know. And when they appear in those two areas, they are not listed exactly the same. They are not even in the exact things are in slightly different orders. And second, even though in English we call them the 10 commandments, Scripture doesn't actually call them that. They're called the Decalogue, the 10 words. And that might seem like a small detail, but it isn't. Because the numbering becomes very confusing because there are more than 10 words. And I mean, understand when people say like the 7 last words of Christ on the cross or the 10, the Decalogue, the 10 words of God, that doesn't mean literally like a word. It means like a saying or a sentence, or it could be a command. But there are more than 10 things that you could list as commands in these sections. And yet we're told there's 10, and there's no numbers given. So all of the numbering of the 10 commandments is man-made. The 10 commandments arguably begin in Exodus 20, 1 to 2. And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Now, that is part of the first word in the Jewish numbering of the 10 commandments. Because it's not a commandment, but it is certainly a word. Many Protestants don't have that at all. Like, it just won't appear at all. So you can already see, like, one of the issues here is we have kind of strange, like, where do we put the numbers? What do we include as part of the 10 words or the 10 commands? Then you have, as I said, the differences between the list in Exodus and the difference in Deuteronomy. The point here is this is a difference in who, if you want to imagine it as like a numbered list, we've got the same content. We just have it numbered differently. And so the Catholic ordering, which is also the Lutheran ordering, puts the first commandment as I'm the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above or that is on the earth beneath, and so on. So the prohibition against idolatry, we view that as part of the first commandment. Non-Lutheran Protestants tend to have that as the second commandment. The prohibition against idolatry is a second distinct commandment. Eastern Catholics also typically have that as a second distinct commandment. So this is not actually a Catholic Protestant issue. You have Western Catholics and Lutherans on one side, Eastern Catholics and evangelicals on the other side. So the idea that this is like, you'll sometimes hear Protestants claiming like, oh, Catholics renumbered the 10 commandments to get rid of the prohibition against idolatry. No, idolatry is against the 10 commandments. The entire dispute is whether it's against the first or second commandment. We don't think that it's idolatry to have statues, and I'll get into why in a moment. But the issue of numbering, like the idea that this is some monkeying with the numbering to try to allow for idolatry, is just historically ignorant. Because the oldest numbering, the Jewish numbering, is not the Protestant numbering. And the early Christians often looked at the list in Deuteronomy 5, rather than the list in Exodus 20, which is going to give you a slightly different listing. So, as I said, the first difference is between the first and second commandment. So we're off by one in the very beginning. The other part where, so you might be saying, okay, well, do you just have one fewer commandment? No. The Catholic Lutheran list, or Western Catholic and Lutheran list, distinguishes between coveting of property and coveting of your neighbor's wife. So coveting your neighbor's wife is the 9th commandment. Coveting your neighbor's stuff, the neighbor's goods, is the 10th commandment. That matches the way this is broken down in Deuteronomy 5, rather than the way it's broken down in Exodus 20. Whereas, and the reason there is covetous lust is a very different sin than materialism. Like wanting stuff versus wanting a human being, we don't even mean coveting in the same way. Those are really two different sins. Whereas idolatry is just a violation of having other gods. If God says, have no other gods before me, okay, then you can't have idolatry, which is having other gods. So if you're going off of the text of Exodus 20, I think the Protestant side, the evangelical side, has a pretty good case. If you're going off of the meaning of the commandments, you can have covetous lust without having materialism, or vice versa. You can't have idolatry without putting another god before God. So the Catholic list makes more thematic sense, where these are 10 different things being commanded or prohibited. But either way, I mean, you can go, this is not an issue that any point of doctrine hangs on whatsoever. And as I said, different Catholics number the list differently, different Protestants number the list differently, Jews number the list differently than Catholics or Protestants do. And this is just an issue of there are no numbers in there, and all of us are trying to arrange what look like about 13 different commandments and an introduction into 10 words, into 10 commandments. So we have to group them somehow. Now, the underlying issue there is this. Many Protestants have been led to believe that the 10 Commandments literally prohibit making graven images. That's how the KJV translates Exodus 20 and the prohibition against idolatry. The problem is that the Hebrew word there, Papal, only means idols. It's only ever used in the Bible to mean idols. It doesn't refer to other things that are engraved. And other things are engraved in the Bible. For instance, there's engraving on the temple. God commands it. The cherubim, God commands that statues of cherubim be engraved and put in front of the Ark of the Covenant. So it's not literally a prohibition against engraving. It's not literally a prohibition against statues, or else God contradicts himself. Rather, it's a prohibition against idols. So idolatry is bad, statues are not. And it's good that we know the distinction there. Like if you have coinage in your pocket and it has an engraving of George Washington, that is not an idol unless you offer it divine worship. And that's true in the Old Testament, it's true in the New Testament, that's true today. So what you have there is two things. One, a misunderstanding of the history of the 10 Commandments, and two, a misunderstanding of the meaning of the prohibition against idolatry.
Ed, thank you very much. That brings us to the break. Joe Heschmeyer, our guest. Drop calls, all collected up for Joe. More of them to come right after this.
Miss a show? Make sure to catch up by downloading the podcast, available online at Catholic.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Magnificat. Published monthly, Magnificat features texts of daily Mass, prayers, articles, meditations, art commentaries, and more, in step with the liturgical rhythm of the Church, on the web at Magnificat.com.
Support for Catholic Answers Live comes from Catholic Chemistry, a dating app for Catholics. Founded by a longtime member of the Catholic Answers team, CatholicChemistry.com.
We should pray because prayer is conversation with God, and conversation is the only way to build a relationship. We need that relationship with God. We should pray and talk with God about what's on our hearts, what's on our minds, what's active in our lives, the joys we have. We should share all of these with God. Prayer is conversation, and conversation is the only way to build a relationship with God. It's the most important relationship. All of our other relationships depend on this one.
Joe Heschmeyer, our guest this hour on Catholic Answers Live, and lots of great questions, because these are questions that came in, and the caller didn't stay on the line for one reason or another, so part of the reason they made the list is they're great questions, and that's why we like doing these drop call shows. Caleb in San Antonio, Texas, Joe, was listening on Guadalupe Radio Network when he called, and he said, why does the Church take the transubstantiation view over the consubstantiation view?
Yeah, this is a point of technical Eucharistic theology, but it's really important.
Okay.
And there's a few ways to kind of suss this out. Now, the first thing to say is Catholics who are listening sometimes we can fall into this trap of imagining that all Protestants think that the Eucharist is just a symbol. And that's true of many Protestants. It's not true of all Protestants. There are a wide variety of Eucharistic views within Protestantism. There is no pope, there is no church within Protestantism capable of settling who's right and who's wrong. And Protestants have been fighting about this amongst themselves since the dawn of the Reformation. And you can see this in the fight between Luther and Zwingli, for instance. But the Lutheran view is that Christ is bodily in, with, and under bread and wine. This view is sometimes called consubstantiation. Con is with, and you just said he's with the bread and wine. Lutherans tend to push back and say that that's not a very good term for it. Nevertheless, when people say consubstantiation, they usually mean the Lutheran view. So the idea is that the bread and wine remain the bread and wine, but also become the body and blood of Christ somehow. And this leads to several problems. Number one, the standard Lutheran view, at least, is that Christ is bodily present with the Eucharist or with the bread and wine during the Mass and only during the Mass. But that is clearly not what the early Christians believed. And we know this from several things. One of the most obvious is that the early Christians would do things like bring communion to the sick. Justin Martyr talks about this in First Apology in the 100s. We also have the early accounts of the monks who would have the Eucharist present in their cells. They might receive communion once every so often, and then they would have the host with them in their cell, where they would be able to worship Christ in the Eucharist and be able to receive communion. That wouldn't make sense on a Lutheran account because Christ wouldn't be there. They would just have bread in their cell. And they clearly believe that they have the Eucharist. Similarly, like St. Ambrose talks about his brother being on a ship and the Eucharist being present there on the ship. Someone had been preserving the Eucharist on the ship. We have plenty of these accounts of the Eucharist being reposed outside of the context of the liturgy and still being treated as the Eucharist, still being treated as Jesus Christ's true body. Second, there's a philosophical problem because God can be man and God without contradiction because there's nothing in the nature of man that's inherently opposed to being God. There are different levels of reality. You can have a blue circle, and it can be 100% blue and 100% circular, and there's no tension between those things. But you couldn't have something that is 100% circular and 100% square because that is a contradiction. So God can be man because God is immaterial by nature. So him becoming man doesn't change any of his divinity. It doesn't change his humanity. We would say that his humanity and divinity are united but unmixed. That just like a blue circle is both blue and circular, and it's not 50% of each. It's not, those two properties are not mixed. They're just entirely distinct. You could become a red circle, and the circle part of it wouldn't change in the slightest, or you could break it in half, and it retains all of its blueness, even while the circularity breaks. Blue and circle are just two levels of reality that can happily interact because they're different. Circle and square, you can't be 100% of both because those are actually contradictory. They're what are called contraries. Humanity and divinity are not contraries. They're different levels of reality. Humanity and bread are contrary. You can say that Jesus is true God and true man. He's 100% divine. He's 100% human with no contradiction, like 100% blue, 100% circle. You can't say that the Eucharist is 100% Jesus and 100% bread because that is nonsensical. Because Jesus has a body, and he can't be both body and bread because the nature of having a body and the nature of being bread are actually contrary things. Like a unicorn, or sorry, a satyr is not 100% goat and 100% man. It's like 50-50. Or, fill in the blanks. Like a half man, half whatever. Because those things are actually contrary to being a material human. At the material level, they can't be both. And so it cannot be bread and wine and the body and blood of Jesus without contradiction. And so if you actually try to press this at just a basic logical level, the Lutheran view does not stand up. Whereas the Catholic view, that it retains the outward appearances of bread and wine, those remain 100% looking like bread and wine, but the internal reality changes to being Jesus There's no contradiction. It's 100% of each of the things it's meant to be, without confusion, without blending. And so those would be some of just the basic reasons to accept transubstantiation as the better interpretation. When Jesus says, "This is my body, this is my blood," he is not saying, "This is my body and also still bread." So we just believe that when he says that it's his body, he says it's his blood, that it actually is those things and those things alone.
Caleb, I thank you very much for the question. Let's go to Joseph in Oklahoma. He was listening on St. Michael Radio in Oklahoma. How does the church balance orthodoxy and heterodoxy, heterodoxy with everything going on? I assume we would have maybe had some follow-up questions for Joseph on this one, but can you work with it, Joe?
I think so. We should take 100% orthodoxy, 0% heterodoxy.
Don't mix them.
Yeah, we don't mix them. They're unmixed. Yeah. Very much in keeping with the last question. I suspect he means this. And Joseph, if this is not what you mean, please feel free to call back and set us straight about the meaning of your question. There are times when people go astray. And then you have this tension where you say, okay, do we just excommunicate everybody who's wrong about anything? Do we, there is this twofold desire that, not just desire, that's not strong enough, a twofold commandment to have both unity and to have truth. That we're told schism is a damnable sin, and heresy is very clearly a damnable sin. Jesus says, the way, the truth, and the life, no one comes to the Father except through him. So you can't reject the truth for the sake of unity. You also can't reject unity for the sake of truth. In John 17, Jesus prays that all his followers will be one, as he and the Father are one. So it can't be either or. And this, one of the points I make in my book, Pope Peter, is this is actually one of the reasons you need papal infallibility, or at least the infallibility of the church, that you have to logically have infallibility for this reason. We can't pursue doctrinal orthodoxy at the expense of unity. And we can't pursue unity at the expense of doctrinal orthodoxy, because we're called to both unity and orthodoxy. Those things are both necessary. So if you can't trust the church, this creates a problem. If the church could say, in order to be a member of our church, you have to believe this heretical thing. That's what many Protestants believe would be the case to be Catholic. If I'm going to be Catholic, I have to believe this thing I know to be false, I know to be heretical. Well, if that's the case, then you're being forced to violate Jesus's commands. Jesus is forcing you to sin. And a good God never forces you to sin. He's never going to put you in a position where you are just like forced in this untenable, impossible position. But it would be a sin to embrace heresy. It'd be a sin to go into schism. And the way many Protestants get around this is they just don't talk about the sin of schism enough. But schism is a damnable sin. St. Paul warns against it numerous times. He warns the Corinthians against it. In Galatians 5, he says that those who do it won't inherit the kingdom of God. In John 17, as I mentioned, this is part of Jesus's prayer for his future disciples. So it wasn't just like schism was a sin back then, but now it's okay. Jesus praying for us, prays that we'll all be one, which is obviously incompatible with the sin of schism. And so we can't just form our new church or a new denomination when we disagree. We also usually can't just talk one another into agreement. Sometimes if you have 2 or 3 people who disagree, they can talk it out and come to an agreement. But if you think that's going to work for the, more than 1 billion Christians on earth, I think you're in a state of delusion. Protestantism has been unable to talk itself into agreement using the Bible alone for 500 years. They've continued to try, it continues to not work. At some point, the church needs to be able to step in and say, here's the right answer. That's the actual biblical model. In Acts 15, they debate with the Judaizers, but they don't leave it at that. They then take it to the church, and the church settles the question authoritatively. The important thing there, though, is the church has the ability to do what the church does in Acts 15, to say it seemed good to the Holy Spirit and to us. The church can act with divine authority, or else you really do have this problem where you're trying to balance unity and orthodoxy in a way that is just literally impossible. If the church can speak infallibly, we can have unity in the truth. If the church can't speak infallibly and makes mistakes, then we have to choose between unity and truth, and we're never given any guidance how to choose between those two because it's a false choice.
Joseph, thank you. Joe, I think I can get one more in before we have to take a break. So I'm going to go to Jeff's question in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. He was listening on Real Presence Radio. Is it possible for a laicized priest to ever be reinstated? Or, excuse me, he said reinstituted. I apologize.
Yeah. So when you become a priest, you become a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. But obviously, a priest can be dismissed from the clerical state or can lose the clerical state or voluntarily leave it. Under Canon 293, he can be restored to the practice of the priesthood through the administration of the Apostolic See.
Oh, all right. Jeff, thanks for the question. Right back with more Drop Calls for Joe on Catholic Answers Live.
Have you ever wondered about the mysterious, even obscure aspects of the Catholic faith? Dive into the Jimmy Akin podcast, where Jimmy brings together information from many fields as he pushes the boundaries of apologetics. Tune in today to the Jimmy Akin podcast, Mysteries of the Faith, a highly entertaining, informative, and at times humorous show that will help you grow in your faith. Visit JimmyAkinPodcast.com today to subscribe.
Lots of people have big questions about Catholicism. It needs a big book of answers. And now it's got one. The Big Book of Catholic Answers is filled with helpful replies to more than 250 questions about the faith. Questions about God, salvation history, the Creed, the Bible, the list goes on and on. Order your copy of the Big Book of Catholic Answers today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
We hope that one of the things that we communicate here at Catholic Answers Live is that our Catholic faith allows us to be fully serious about all the problems we encounter in the church and in the world, but it also lets us have light hearts and maybe even mix in a bit of fun, and that is exactly what our good friend Joe Heschmeyer does in his popular podcast, Shameless Popery. You should check it out at shamelessjoe.com. Joe's got a deep grasp of the faith, morals, the teachings of the church, all that, but he's also got a witty conversational style. He entertains and he informs, but you will leave equipped to better answer the most common challenges, misconceptions, and questions about the Catholic faith. He's got insightful guests, he does on-air debates, and he takes a close look into all the things that you want to know about as a Catholic living today. You'll walk away knowledgeable and filled with joy. Look for Joe on his YouTube channel. Check him out at shamelessjoe.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, become a patron.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. A little bit of groovy music for you there. Joe Heschmeyer, our guest. All the calls are in already because it's drop calls today. And lots of great questions from these drop calls because that's why we gathered them up. We're like, oh, that was a good, it's too bad that person didn't stay on the line or Cy hung them up on them by accident or whatever happened to them. We don't know. But because they were good calls, we just gather them up and we share them with the apologist, and that is Joe today. Mason in Nashville, Tennessee, was listening on our website, Catholic.com, and wanted to know this, Joe. Under what circumstances does a priest allow a non-Catholic to participate in the Eucharist?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It depends what kind of non-Catholic we're talking about. Are we talking about Eastern Orthodox? Are we talking about Protestant? Are we talking about an unbaptized person? Because the rules are going to be different in each of those cases. Canon 844 of the Code of Canon Law talks about this. Now, maybe I should give a little bit of the background to why this is. So there's two things to know. First, the early Christians took Jesus's words, "Do not give what is holy to the dogs," as a reference to not sharing communion with those who are not in the fold. And those are harsh words, like those are very strong words, and I understand people are sometimes offended by them. The important thing there is just that we see in the first century and onward a clear Christian teaching of what's called closed communion. If you go to many Protestant churches, it's anybody who wants to can come up and receive, and even if you are unbaptized, you're often invited to come up and receive communion. That is very obviously unchristian. Like that is very obviously not the Christian practice. And you see this, as I said, in the earliest Christian writings. The Didache talks about not giving what's holy to the dogs. First apology by St. Justin Martyr is from about 160 AD. And it talks about the standards that you have to be baptized, you have to believe what we believe, and you have to be living in accordance with those teachings in order to receive the Eucharist. So this is not some, medieval invention. This is not some modern reaction to Protestantism or anything like this. Like, no, this is just very basic teaching of Christians for 2,000 years. Now, how does that kind of shake out? As you might imagine, that means that we don't offer the Eucharist to those who are unbaptized, because, that's cut and dry. Where we have a more complicated case is where we have people who have been validly baptized, but who are in a complicated relationship with us. And that would be Protestants and Orthodox, most obviously. And as I say, Canon 844 of the Code of Canon Law deals with these cases. First, it says Catholic ministers administer the sacraments licitly to the Catholic members of the Christian faithful alone, who likewise receive them licitly from Catholic ministers alone, without prejudice to, and then it has the kind of exceptions. So then the exceptions, section 2 deals with when you can receive from basically an Orthodox priest. When can you go to a minister who has valid sacraments, and it deals with that. But that's not the question we're asked today. So we look at section 3 and section 4. Section 3 says Catholic ministers administer the sacraments of penance, Eucharist, and anointing of the sick licitly to members of Eastern churches who do not have full communion with the Catholic Church. So that's Eastern Orthodox. It's also going to be Oriental Orthodox, if they seek such on their own accord and are properly disposed. That's a pretty low bar. Like if an Orthodox person presents themselves for communion and they meet all the other standards, they're not in a state of mortal sin, they're not some notorious sinner, they're properly disposed, then they can receive. This is also valid for members of other churches, which in the judgment of the Apostolic See are in the same condition in regard to the sacraments as these Eastern churches. So there's going to be a handful of breakoffs, like the Polish National Catholic Church, where it's these schismatic groups, but they still have valid sacraments. So if you still have a valid priesthood and you have valid sacraments and the church has adjudicated that this is the case, we are in close enough union that if you present yourself for communion, we can give you communion. Then section 4 says, if the danger of death is present, or if in the judgment of the diocesan bishop or conference of bishops, some other grave necessity urges it, Catholic ministers administer these same sacraments licitly also to other Christians not having full communion with the Catholic Church. In other words, Protestants, who cannot approach a minister of their own community and who seek such on their own accord, provided that they manifest Catholic faith in respect to these sacraments and are properly disposed. So you'll notice that the set of criteria is slightly different. Here, it's not just that you seek out the Eucharist on your own accord, and it's not just that you're properly disposed. You must also believe what we believe about the Eucharist. Why do they add that? Because Orthodox do. So a faithful Orthodox person is already going to check that box. A Protestant has to not believe what their church believes about the Eucharist. They have to believe the truth about the Eucharist. So if they can't just believe the Eucharist is just a symbol, so if someone might be a Baptist or a Methodist, in order to receive communion in the Catholic Church, they have to believe the Catholic Church is right on the Eucharist and not have like a Baptist or Methodist view of the Eucharist. But if they have all of those things, they can still only receive in case of danger of death or grave necessity. And the reason is because if you realize that the denomination you belong to is wrong and the Catholic Church is right, the ordinary means of rectifying that is just become Catholic. So you can't just, decide, well, I decided last week, I think Catholics have this one right, and so I'm going to start receiving at the Catholic Church. No, there's a broader process where you actually become fully a part of the church, which leads to the last point to kind of wrap all this up. One of the reasons for this is that communion is communion with Christ, but it's also communion with the church. This is the biblical teaching. St. Paul says that the church is one body because we partake of the one loaf. that we are one church because of the Eucharist. So you don't want to declare yourself part of that church through your actions and then go back to being a Methodist next week or something. So there's an actual process where, barring grave necessity or danger of death, that we would just say, well, yeah, if you believe this stuff is true, let's go to OCIA, let's sit down with the priest, let's have you be confirmed and brought into the church fully.
Mason, thank you very much for that. I think I'm going to do another question before we go to a break. This one comes from Arash in Fort Worth, Texas. He was watching on YouTube, and I am having trouble reading my own document. I'm sorry, my computer's messing up a little bit. Okay, so Arash said, there's evidence that Irenaeus of Lyon was a millennialist. Is there any room in Catholicism for being a millennialist?
It depends what we mean kind of about this. There are different views on the end times. Millennialism. So the issue is like when Revelation refers to the 1,000-year reign of Christ, what does that mean? And his views are not held by the Catholic Church, but in terms of like what the 1,000-year reign refers to, there are legitimate differences in Catholic thinking on this question. So, you know what, Si, if it's okay, I'm going to give a longer answer to this. Can we go to the break and then come back and I can give a longer answer? Does that work?
I don't see any way that I can say no. I think you've put me in an impossible situation.
Wonderful.
Okay, yeah, let's take a quick break. Right back, or Joe will finish answering this one.
There's only one Catholic Answers Live.
The Catechism defines evangelization as the proclamation of Christ and his gospel by word and the testimony of life. But what does that look like in real life? It looks like St. Paul street evangelists out in the public square sharing the good news. We're a Catholic nonprofit that starts conversations by handing out free sacramentals. Then we employ our method of listen, befriend, proclaim, and invite. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to learn more.
The wisdom of Mother Angelica.
I told him about the woman who came to me and said her two children hadn't spoken to each other for 2 years. Their grandma died and she was very wealthy. She left half to each one. She said they're arguing over a commode. She said it's inlaid. Can you imagine being in hell and somebody saying to you, what are you here for?
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Feels like it's going really quick today. I think it's because the questions have been so good. A lot of great questions today for Joe Heschmeyer, our guest. We're working on the question from Arash in Fort Worth, Texas, who was watching on YouTube. And Arash, like all of our questions today, called, but we weren't able to stay on the call with him. So we thought, well, let's get to the question anyways, because it was a good one. And his question is about Irenaeus of Lyon. There's evidence, Arash says, that Irenaeus of Lyon was a millennialist. Is there any room in Catholicism for being a millennialist?
Yeah, so it's a good question. And Irenaeus is actually not alone. You can find a smattering. The Epistle of Barnabas, I believe, reflects some of these tendencies as well. And I realized as I started to answer the question that it was just going to take maybe a little bit longer to kind of explain. So you have this 1,000-year reign in the book of Revelation. And what does that mean? And what should we understand that to mean? And what's like a proper Christian interpretation of that? The short version is we don't take that to mean a literal earthly utopia. And we actually think that that's a very dangerous thing to try to hold. So here's section 676 of the Catechism of the Catholic Church. The Antichrist deception already begins to take shape in the world every time the claim is made to realize within history that messianic hope, which can only be realized beyond history through the eschatological judgment. The church has rejected even modified versions of this falsification of the kingdom to come under the name of millennialism, especially the intrinsically perverse political form of secular messianism. Now, obviously, that's not the exact thing that Irenaeus is trying to promote. But there is this dangerous idea that you can bring the kingdom of God around on this earth. And so in 1944, the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith made clear that this idea that Christ the Lord, before the visible judgment, whether or not preceded by the resurrection of the many just, will come visibly to rule over the world. And they said this system of mitigated millennialism, I cannot say that word to save my life, cannot be taught safely. In other words, when we talk about the 1,000-year reign of Christ, this is a metaphorical, not literal 1,000 years. And this is referring to things like the reign of Christ in his church. If you imagine that Jesus is going to become like the global leader of, a world empire for 1,000 years, before or after the resurrection of the dead, different end times, people are going to have different theories about that. Neither of those is a safe teaching to hold. And the church pushes against that precisely because, as the Catechism points out, that kind of false belief ironically makes you more susceptible to believing in like the deception of the Antichrist, because you're trying to inaugurate the kingdom of God on earth. And so we would just say, nope, don't read it in that way. That is not a safe reading of Scripture.
That was Arash in Fort Worth, Texas. Arash, thank you very much for the question. Going to a question from South Dakota now. John was listening on 88.9 FM in South Dakota. I like this question. Who took over after Peter? Who was he? I like the emphasis, the second emphasis. Who was he?
Yeah.
All right. Do we know who took over after Peter?
So it's actually an interesting kind of debate on this. And the reason is because of very particular wording that we have in the writings of some of the early church fathers, namely Irenaeus. So Irenaeus in Book 3, Chapter 3, I quoted from that actually in the last hour, traces apostolic succession. He's writing about 180, but this is also the first time we get Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John being the four Gospels. And he says this: the blessed apostles, he means Peter and Paul, then having founded and built up the church, committed into the hands of Linus the office of the episcopate. So that would make Linus the obvious successor. And then he says, of this Linus, Paul makes mention in the epistles to Timothy. He refers there to 2 Timothy 4, verse 21, where Paul gives a greeting to Linus. To him succeeded Anacletus, and after him, in the third place from the apostles, Clement was allotted the bishopric. Okay, so there's a scholarly dispute here whether Linus and Cletus, before Clement, whether Linus and Cletus were the bishops of Rome as successors to the apostles, or whether they had some kind of role under Peter and Paul while Peter and Paul were still alive. Most scholars and most Catholics are going to say the immediate successor of Peter is Linus, that he is the second pope. That's the normal papal numbering. You will find people who say Linus and Cletus are entrusted with the office of the episcopate, but is something like an auxiliary bishop while Peter and Paul are alive, and that Clement is allotted the bishopric in the third place from the apostles because he's the first to be the pope after the death of the apostles. I mention this because when you read ancient documents, some will talk about Clement as the successor of Peter, and some will talk about Linus. And this seems to be borne out in this subtle ambiguity in the language Irenaeus is using. I think the better read is probably that Linus is the second pope rather than Clement, and that people are reading too much into a very slight difference in verbiage. But those would be, either way. We know that Peter and Paul established Linus. Because the other thing is, what does it mean to say they committed into the hands of Linus, the office of the episcopate? It sounds like they've been giving him some sort of authority as bishop in Rome, which is not what usually happens. Usually when a pope dies, they then elect the next pope. But here they either handpicked him while they were alive and then he became bishop when they died, or He was serving as bishop in Rome while they were alive, and then either he or Anacletus or Clement took over upon their death. But those are the orders of the men who are chosen from Peter and Paul down to Leo. So they chose Linus, and then the line continues on from there.
Am I being dumb in saying this? But it seems to me that either way, in that controversy, it comports just fine with the Catholic teaching on
No,
this.
there is people will point out the fact that there is some historical ambiguity to be like, aha, we can't trust the Catholic list. But it's like, no, we're just being honest about the limitations of the historical record.
Know.
There are times that the historical record is very clear, and then you have these cases where we are limited about how much we can say about particular moments in history, and we want to be honest about those limitations to not overstate the case. Either way, I mean, if you read Irenaeus, if you read anyone talking about the early lists of bishops, it's very clear that they have a strong sense that there have been an unbroken line of bishops from the time of the apostles down to their age.
Yeah,
and
right.
even though Irenaeus is the list that we still have today, and it's from about 180, we know it's not actually the oldest list that was ever made. Hegesippus mentions having made a list about 20 years earlier. We just don't have that list anymore. Tertullian mentions that all of the churches founded by apostles can trace their lineage of bishops. And he's writing about 200, but it's very clear that everybody is keeping track of their list of bishops. And Irenaeus, I should mention, it says in this same work that it would be possible to do this for all of the churches founded by the apostles. But he says, since, however, it would be very tedious in such a volume of this to reckon up the succession of all of the churches, he decides to do it for Rome because it's a matter of necessity that every church agrees with Rome. So the succession of Roman bishops, popes, is more important than the succession of all the bishops of Corinth or something, but we could do it for Corinth in the 100s.
Right.
So don't imagine that just because 180 is the oldest evidence we have and we're confused by some of the evidence, that this means that Christians in 180 were confused about the evidence, or that was the oldest evidence that they had. They had documents that are now lost to us. I mean, the simple fact is most written documents in antiquity are lost. The number I've heard before is about 98% of things written down in the past would have gotten destroyed just through natural process of, papyrus disintegrates, etc. So there's a lot we don't know, but it's very clear from listening to them that they had good reasons to believe and to know that there was this unbroken lineage of popes.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, John, for that question. You say that about the loss of the early documents, and that's absolutely true. But it's going to be exciting over the next 20, 30 years with X-ray tomography and supercomputers. They're starting to read documents that could never be read before.
That's
so we're
true.
I'm kind of excited to find out what we're going to learn about the ancient world.
Actually, on that note, there was recently, I think last year, there was a silver inscription. Or I guess it's 2024. So summer of 2024, there was a Bulgarian silver amulet that was discovered. There was a German silver amulet. What is that called? Frankfurt silver inscription. It was discovered in Frankfurt, Germany, 1800 years old. The earliest physical evidence we have of a Christian north of the Rhine, I believe.
North of the Alps.
North of the Alps, excuse me. Yeah, that's right. And it begins with an invocation for the intercession of St. Titus.
Yeah,
which
I know.
Is at this period of time where people, we know this guy died between like 230 and 270. Like we can date his, we know how old the burial site that he's in is and everything else. And here he's got the intercession of the saints, which you will hear Protestants to this day claim was some later post-Constantine innovation in Christianity. It's like, no. Here's this guy who died before Constantine was born, seeking the intercession of St. Titus. It tells you a lot, I think.
Yeah, I am of the view that manuscripts and archaeology are the best friends of the Catholic Church. I say more and more and more of it. They tell the Christian story, and you think about in the 1900s, people saying, well, John's description of the pool of Siloam is clearly just a kind of poetic. He's making a parable out of this place. It doesn't exist, and then they find it. So I feel like you can be as skeptical as you want, but the archaeology and the history are on the side of the Christian story, and in particular the Catholic story. So I look forward to every new discovery.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
Even though I know that the media will misinterpret it when it first reports it, I don't care. It's still the truth gets out eventually.
When you see the headline, don't just take that for granted. Go and research it. It's one of those things where any field well, when you see the way the media reports on it, you say, "Oh, well, that's not very accurate. That's not. That's half true. That's not correct." And so just remember that when you're reading an area you don't know well, that they're probably just as inaccurate.
Yeah, right. The first draft of history is always, especially when it comes to these things where people kind of have agendas like religion, just don't worry about the first draft. But when the truth comes out from archaeology and manuscript discoveries, it's always just wonderful to find out. Like the Dead Sea Scrolls showing us the text of Isaiah is virtually unchanged for 2,200 years.
Those things it's huge. It really does. It complicates the kind of skeptical vision of history.
Right. All right. So let me get you another question. Louise in Texas, listening on the Guadalupe Radio Network, wanted to know, do I really need to seek out indulgences?
You're not required to. It's like asking, do I need to do the extra credit? The whole point of indulgences is this. When you are forgiven of sin, even though you're forgiven, you still have some debt owed from the sin. You've done something wrong and you want to set it right. Not set it right in the way where you replace what Jesus did for you on the cross, but like if you steal somebody's car and you're truly contrite, you're going to give the car back. You might have to go to jail. You might have to work on rebuilding those relationships, etc. This is what we call the temporal consequence due to sin. Frequently, you can't set things right in a one-to-one kind of correspondence. You can't just repair all of the damage you've done. And so there are like other ways you can rebuild those relationships. There's other ways of sort of satisfying those debts. Now, two things to know here. One, all Christians are called to purification. St. Paul is very clear about this in 2 Corinthians 7. He talks about the fact that we've been given these promises. He says, since we have these promises, beloved, let us cleanse ourselves from every defilement of body and spirit and make holiness perfect in the fear of God. He's writing to Christians, and he doesn't take for granted that they're already completely purified of body and spirit or that their holiness is perfect. If you think your holiness is perfect, I think you might have a lot of work to do on your holiness. And so indulgences are one of the ways of growing in purification, and you can apply an indulgence. I'm not going to get into all of the theology of indulgences. I'm just speaking here to people who have a basic idea of what an indulgence is. It's not the forgiveness of your sins, but it is a way of setting things right after your sins have been forgiven. And indulgences are good for your own sake. You can also get them for those who have died. And so it's incredibly spiritually beneficial. Are you required to do it? No. Is it really good to do? Absolutely. Is it like a wonderful way of growing in your own holiness as well as bringing other people with you? It is. So it's something that I wish more Catholics would take seriously, to say, like, we should be doing these things because there's not really any downside. Like, these are things that help you in your relationship with God. So I would really encourage, particularly if you're listening to this during the season of Lent, to take seriously the idea of, attaining an indulgence. We're doing a drop call episode, so I don't know if you're listening to this during Lent. Whenever you're listening to it, I hope that you take seriously the fact that you can grow in your relationship, and the church gives you very concrete ways to do it.
Amen to that. Amen to that. How many gifts we have in the Catholic Church. Joe Heschmeyer is one of them. I was so nice to Joe today.
You were so nice.
I should get some kind of indulgence for this. I'm going to look it up.
You really indulged me today.
Joe, thank you very much. A great 2 hours. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Well, that'll do it for us. Look, if you call on a normal day, we're going to just take your call. But if that call drops, we might still answer your question later. So give us a call when we're on the air. We'd love to talk with you. And if we're not able to talk with you, we'll still probably answer your question later. That'll do it for us. We'll see you next time, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.